Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company, the bank that puts you first. They can meet your banking and financing needs for personal, agricultural, business, commercial, mortgages, and so much more. Visit firstbank.com to learn more.
Today on the Tech Sideline Podcast, about a year ago, Tech Sideline hired Andy Bitter after he was laid off by The Athletic. We've never really talked publicly or written publicly about how that whole process went, and we thought you might find it interesting, so we're going to cover that on today's Tech Sideline Podcast. Plus, we're also going to talk about a bunch of other stuff. I want to get Andy's perspective on sports writing, on working for Tech Sideline, on his career, and all that kind of stuff, and that's coming up next on Tech Sideline Podcast 361, which starts right now. Welcome back, Em. I'm Tech Sideline founder Will Stewart, and the Tech Sideline Podcast, as always, is presented by First Bank and Trust Company. And today we'd like to announce a new sponsor, the Robertson and Cox Real Estate Team. If you're looking to buy, sell, or invest in real estate, they've got your back. Centrally located in Radford, Virginia, the RNC team is proudly and professionally serving the New River Valley, Roanoke, and Southwest Virginia. With over 35 combined years of experience, they have all the knowledge needed to help you reach your real estate goals and have the best experience possible. Contact them today for all of your real estate needs. Visit rndcteam.com to learn more. So I'm Tech Sideline founder Will Stewart. Sitting across the way is, what's your title, Andy? Senior staff writer?
I don't know. You guys made it up, so something like that. I cover the football team.
I didn't think it was professional to call you new guy. I've handed out all the titles to everybody else, and I'm like, well, we'll just make Andy senior staff writer.
This is like associate head coach or like assistant recruiting director. Like you give everybody a title on the staff, just like a football coach over there.
And we pay you well. So I know the joke. The joke is you gave him the title so you don't have to pay him. Actually, we pay Andy pretty well, and we're going to sort of cover that. But welcome into my laboratory. This is what I would call the second episode of Founder's Corner. I'm the founder. It's my corner. And the first one was we did a podcast with Evan Hughes and Jake Lyman. Did you by any chance listen to that?
I did. I don't think I heard that one.
It's pretty good. It didn't get a lot of views on YouTube. Didn't get a lot of listens. You know, it's basically the same as one of our Triumph Spotlights. But if you're a fan of the Tech Sideline Podcast and you listen and watch the Tech Sideline Podcast during Evan's tenure here and Jake's tenure here, we tell some. I thought it was pretty good. We told some pretty funny stories.
Sort of an inside baseball kind of look at things, I think.
I guess if you say so. So a couple things. I wouldn't say I'm obsessed with Joe Rogan's podcast. I just enjoy listening to it. And so as we become larger and larger as a staff and we have more and more people on the podcast, I'm like, I would like to do that sort of thing where I'm just sitting, hanging out with people and talking. And the other thing is I need to do more of this stuff because as we'll get into later, I'm getting to where, and I'm not the guy saying, oh, I'm getting older, I don't remember anything. I don't remember things. I don't remember the details about a lot of stuff. So let's jump right into it. What we're billing this as, we're billing this podcast is how Tech Sideline hired Andy Bitter. It's been a year since you and I first started talking.
Very niche podcast, for the record.
Yeah, if you're a Tech Sideline fan, you'll like it. If you want to know what the starting lineup for the men's basketball team is going to be next year, this is not your podcast. So let's start. We're going to cover a lot of stuff, but let's start with that specific topic. So you were with The Athletic, and when did you start working for them?
That was in 2018.
Wow.
Summer of 2018.
Yeah.
Because it was right before the terrible season. It's like you go into a new job like that and you're like, okay,
that season started off great.
Tech is kind of rolling. You can understand why the Athletic would hire a full-time beat writer for Virginia Tech. It looked like the Hokies were back. Those first couple of years had won 19 games in 2 years under Fuente to start, and then hired in the summer of 2018, and then the program just kind of falls off there that season. So it wasn't great timing in that sense. But 2018 was when I was hired there.
See, that's an interesting perspective because I look at it from the perspective of a business standpoint. They were receiving rounds of funding. And I think they eventually received something like 2 or 3 different rounds of $30 to $40 million in funding. And, you know, whenever you're creating some sort of enterprise and you're getting funding, you don't necessarily make good business decisions. You got to spend the money. The capital's being invested and your job is to grow this fledgling enterprise, spend the money, go wide and shallow, staff it out, and then sell it to someone else for more money than has been invested in it. Everybody cashes out. And then whoever buys it has to learn how to actually run it as a profitable business. So what you say isn't wrong, but they were basically staffing out to cover pretty much everything. So
a lot. And, you know, you have to remember the financial time at that point. It was very cheap. You know, money was cheap at that point. I mean, the interest rates aren't what they are today. There's a lot of VC interest in a lot of things. So I think it was a different climate than it is today in terms of starting an online venture like that.
Yeah. So later on, I want to circle back around and get into your decision to join them and all that stuff. So summer of 2018. And do you remember coming on the Tech Side? Of course, you remember coming on the Tech Sideline podcast. Do you remember when that was?
I don't remember. I remember I had my athletic hoodie, so it had to have been a little bit after I had been there. So I was advertising.
I had my athletic T-shirt on. You remember?
Yeah, you got to advertise the company when you're doing that. So I do remember coming on the set and doing the podcast that one time, but I can't remember exactly when that was.
Well, that was I looked it up this morning before we went on. That was February of 2020. February of 2020.
Interesting times.
Yes. So we had the there was a piece of furniture there. It was outdoor deck furniture, and it's actually on my deck at home now. That sat right there, and where the red shirt chair sits now. And so we were just building up to having guests in. All we'd ever done was the 2 or 3 of us had talked. So you were our first guest. Teal was our second guest. David Teal was our second guest, and then COVID started, and that was the end of that. We all sat around talking to each other wearing masks for like a year or so.
That's good. I can lord that over Teal that I was the first guest to come onto the set.
Pretty sure you were first.
If you have that right. If not, then disregard that.
Well, it was episode 117, so I got to look and see when Teal was. So
let's just, for my own ego, let's say that I was first.
So that was February 2020. And so you were with them for 5 years. I'm doing the math in my head. If summer of 2018 to
4 years, 4.5.
4.5.
Yeah.
So let's jump into the unfun part. The day that they let you know that they were letting you go. I got laid off once. I knew it was coming. Won't get into the details of that. That's another story. Back when I worked in the real world before I became this thing today. Did you know it was coming? Because an important thing that had happened was in the interim, The Athletic had been sold to the New York Times.
Right. That had been about a year prior to when that happened. I was actually touring a house with my wife when the news came down. And of course, she's the worrier of the family. She's like, oh no, you can't do this in your job. And I'm like, no, it's fine. And of course she was correct. So she wins this argument forever in our marriage, and she's going to be able to hold that over my head forever that she was correct in her assessment. That week, let's see, it's like Wednesday. And it's interesting. I just got back from Vegas. Went on another Vegas trip recently. I was booking a trip to Vegas at the time because we wanted to see John Mulaney. We're a fan of his comedy. He was I couldn't get to any of the shows on the East Coast when he was around here in the fall. So he opened up a set at the Wynn in Las Vegas. I'm like, we should go. We should go do this. We have the vacation. Things are going great.
Like, so is this March of 2023?
This is in late February of 2023.
2023. Okay.
So yeah, it was like Wednesday night, and not lying, I click on the button to buy the tickets and book the Vegas trip, and then I get an email from my boss. It's like, hey, quick check in on Friday. No need to prepare anything. And I didn't think of anything of it. I'm sitting there, I'm making my reservations and stuff like that. It was performance review time for college football. So I just figured that's what it was.
Okay.
Nothing out of the ordinary. In hindsight, a last-second Friday meeting should have been blaring red sirens.
That's
going
when people
off.
get laid off.
Right, exactly.
On Friday.
And I didn't think about that. And actually, it was like 11 o'clock a.m. on Fridays when I'm setting up to go to the thing. And like right before that, I don't know if I just like had a sense, like something in my mind was like, I'm setting this thing up. And I'm like, And then I log on to the thing and, you think you're meeting with just your boss to talk on it, and the screen pops. You're doing it on Zoom,
and then there's other people in the room.
It pops up, and it's 4 people in the room.
Oh crap!
And
I don't mean to laugh.
Instantaneously, I knew it at that point. I liken it. The scene in Goodfellas where Joe Pesci's character is about to be made. And they bring him into the room, and he looks around the room.
And he knows something's not right.
He's like, and then like a second later, the bullet's through his head. That's what it's like. The screen pops up. There's 4 people there. And I'm like, it's over at that point. And then you sit there for 10 minutes, whatever it is. It's like, get on with it here. Like, let's get to this. I got a few choice words in. Said some peace to the people on the other end of that line, but that was it. And it's over in 10 minutes, and it's jarring. I'd never been through something like that before. Yeah. And like I saw that movie, was that George Clooney movie, Up in the Air?
I was going to ask you about that, if you've seen that one.
I saw that. I rewatched it recently, and it hits you different after you've been laid off. And you see those testimonials at the beginning. I think the way they filmed that is they actually had people who had been laid off give actual testimonials to the camera. And like there were some actors in there too, but there were some actual real people there. And like the things they're saying, I'm like, man, that hits a lot closer to home now after this whole thing. So it was, I guess in hindsight, I shouldn't have been stunned by it. A year out from after the New York Times purchase, they had gone long enough without laying people off that they could act like, no, we kept everybody on board. It's like, you didn't. You were going to make major changes to this whole thing. And
well, didn't they have people leave and they weren't replacing them?
We had a ton of people. I say we, I'm no longer working there, but they had a ton of people, college football wise, that left, and they left major beats. It was Florida State, Texas during the pandemic. They laid off the Texas writer, never replaced it. Major colleges that they weren't covering, and yet they continued to cover Virginia Tech, and should have seen it coming like that. There was an opening covering the Vikings the previous summer, and I didn't really, I threw my hat in the ring late for it after it was already way too far down the process of hiring somebody else. So I think about that. I'm like, I should have just gone for it right away. Or there was a Steelers beat job that was open. It's like I could have, gone somewhere else and covered something else, because obviously they didn't prize the college football side of this thing. And they sort of changed, the model of what they were doing. It was a team, when it was founded, this is a team, local team coverage. That's what we're going to do. It's going to be your local newspaper section, only we're going to do it nationwide. And once the New York Times bought it, they really shifted their focus. And now I look at their college football coverage, and it's a shell of what it used to be. Yeah. It's we're writing about Deion Sanders again. Oh, great. Can't get that coverage anywhere. Could I see another Deion Sanders story on this? Here's a listicle article for the ACC. I mean, they don't cover it in any meaningful way, a lot of the stuff. And I'm not saying everybody, because they still have a lot of great beat writers doing really good work on their beats there, but it's just the big schools. And then they sort of give, secondhand coverage to everybody else, third-hand coverage, really. I mean, you look at the Virginia Tech page now, and it's like a listicle every now and then that even taps on the Hokies. So, I feel for some of the writers that are there that have been shoehorned into other positions where they're writing, they used to be like really good beat writers, and they're writing feature stories and stuff, and now they're writing like recruiting articles and here's the, top 10 players. And it's like, you can get that stuff anywhere. That was the point of The Athletic, was that it was different, and they've gone away from that. It's kind of a shame, because I feel like the founders sold out they cashed in with the New York Times, but in doing so, they gave up control of the company and now, leave it to a newspaper to screw things up.
Do you think any of that is ivory tower New York snobbery over college football, or
I don't think I think it's more about I think a lot of it had to do with markets.
Right.
They wanted to be in major markets and put their resources towards major markets, and Southwest Virginia is not that. A lot of stuff they had, like the LSU beat writer transitioned to covering golf. That's LSU football we're talking about, a team that won a national championship in the not so distant past here. And now he's covering golf. They have no LSU beat writer.
Yeah.
It's like, that's strange to me. So I feel like there was just a major adjustment in how they were doing stuff. They wanted to be in bigger markets. There's not a lot else for me to cover out here. They'd always be like, well, how close are you to DC? I'm like, 4 hours. It's not close.
Please no.
Like, I'm closer to Charlotte than I am to DC. Like, that's, I'm sort of out here in no man's land. So I think that had a lot to do with it. It was just a restructuring of a company that paid a lot of money for this thing and was trying to figure out a way to make it profitable. And I think doing that, they had to, cut out a lot of line items on the salary expense there. And unfortunately, one of those was my job.
Did they ever tell you, like, I'm always, every decision I make is driven by, number one, what's best for the company, what's best for the coverage. And number two, what does my spreadsheet tell me I can do? So did you ever get a sense of how many subscribers were there for the Virginia Tech stuff?
It was a small but loyal following, but it was enough people.
Define small, 500, 1,000?
I mean, in terms of like people who were following the Virginia Tech page, it was 3,500, 4,000.
No kidding.
And you think of, I think they said the average, the amount of money they were bringing in from the average subscriber was something like $70-some. So you multiply that out. They weren't losing money on Virginia Tech, but they were, shifting resources around, and apparently it wasn't enough. So I can understand from the perspective of, why are we covering Virginia Tech full time? This program's been in the dumps for a while. It hasn't been what it was before. It never quite realized what they thought it would be when they were founding this thing in 2018. My major hang-up was, it was insulting to me that they thought that's all I could do.
As opposed to deploying you somewhere else.
Right. I think I'm a pretty good feature writer. I have covered, we had an Alabama job opening at the time, and they were going to fill it. Not that I wanted to move back to Alabama.
But you would work. For those that don't know, you covered Auburn.
I covered Auburn. I lived down there for 3 years.
Wow.
I had been an SEC beat writer. I've been doing this for 20 years. So it's kind of insulting to me that they didn't even consider that I could do something like that or do something else within the company. So that's the part that was insulting to me. That was never even a discussion. It was just like, nope, off with your head here.
So you're cut loose, and so I'll give you the perspective from our side of the fence. We'd been watching The Athletic for years, and The Athletic did two things that Chris Coleman and I would look at each other and go, yeah, that's not going to last. Number one, they would say we're not going to have advertising. You have to have some advertising to make it in this business. You don't have to be running network ads in the margins and the borders like we do. We run too much of that stuff, and I hate it, but it's become part of our business model. So, but I always thought that the thing that they should do is just sell sponsorships nationally, unobtrusive ads, that sort of stuff. So I knew that would change over time. And sure enough, if you read an Athletic article now, there's ads in it. But
there's ads. They're not as annoying as the newspaper sites.
Right.
The newspaper sites, you get on there and it's like the entire screen is ads except for like this sliver of text. It's like, I can't even read the article.
There's literally
so much stuff. There's a video popping up and there's ads flashing.
There's a paragraph and an ad and a paragraph and an ad.
The reader experience is horrible on that. So whoever designs those websites, like, figure it out. That's awful.
So there's that. And then the other thing was, and this is because they were trying to capture as many subscribers as possible so they could prep themselves to sell. This is when you go wide and shallow. They're almost giving the subscriptions away.
Exactly.
$35 for a year and stuff like that.
They're still doing that.
I know.
I mean, if your subscriptions ends and they're like, oh, it's going to be $100 for the year, you'll be like, no. And they'll come back to you like, fine, $5 for the year. It's like, you're terrible negotiators. If this is immediately how much you drop the price to.
Well, Car and Driver does that. I've been subscribing to Car and Driver since 1988.
Yeah.
And it's funny. So they get my credit card and they get the renewal and they send me the card that says, oh, it's about to renew for $35. And I'm like, no, it's not. So I cancel it. And then they offer it to me for $12.
Right. They don't want the churn in terms of subscribers. But yeah, the little pro tip there, whenever your subscriptions, I still subscribe. I
do too.
I do it. Actually, I have a little baseball card side hustle, and the features that they write on The Athletic are very helpful for biographical stuff in terms of that. So it's a small business expense to pay to continue to do it. But yeah, when it's about to expire, just let it run out, and they'll come back. They'll come back begging for you.
So, by the way, folks, we don't do that at Tech Sideline. We never do that. We charge $120 a year, which is a lot. We understand it's a lot, but we have a full-time staff of multiple people, and we're not going to lowball just to get you in because this is what it costs.
Well, you say a lot. It's $10 a month.
Well, it's great coverage.
I know. But when I think of a lot, like $10 a month, like the money that I waste a month, $10. I'm not saying this just because I work here, but I'm just like, sometimes people see the 120, like, I'm not going to pay that. And then you break it down per month. It's like, I mean, I spent that much on lunch, or will spend that much on lunch today. It's just like one less lunch. I will
literally wake up some days and be too lazy to make a sandwich and go to Bojangles and spend $10.
Right. So that's how I view the whole thing when it's the monthly payment.
But I'm not going to compromise our business just so I can say I have another subscriber who's in for like $20 a year. So anyway, we'd been watching The Athletic, and we used to talk about what happens if The Athletic decides they don't want to cover Virginia Tech anymore. So one of the questions, and I'm sorry I don't have the message board thread up, but one of the people that responded to a post I put up yesterday said they wanted me to ask you, and they wanted to ask me. So like ask Andy if you ever thought about working for Tech Sideline. We'll get to that in a second. But I can answer the other question now. Did we ever think about Andy Bitter working for Tech Sideline? Well, sure we did, because Chris and I would sit there and watch it and watch what The Athletic was doing and wonder, are they ever going to cut Andy loose? And so we were ready. And at the time that it happened, which was, did you say late February?
Yeah.
Early March, around in there. At the time that it happened, Tech Sideline was in a good cash position, and it's a no-brainer. It's like, oh, great, finally, instead of like people having to subscribe to both places, some people being over there and not over here and vice versa, we can combine this thing. So it took me no time to sit down with the spreadsheet and go, okay, here's what I got to do. I think I had no clue how many new subscribers you would bring. I could guess at that. But I knew that by adding you, we could justify a higher subscription price. So we went from $100 to $120 a year. And I knew how much money that would generate. And I knew you'd bring some subscribers over. So I make you the offer. So I sit there and I write this thing up. And I'm like, I'm going hard to the hole, man. I was guessing how much you were making at the Roanoke Times, making at The Athletic. And I'm like, I want to offer him more than that. Financially, I want this to be an easy decision. So I sit there and I write up my letter to you. And I'm going to do this, and this. Here's the offer. So I sit there at my email and I go, send. Well, wait a minute. Let's back up a little bit further because we had conversations before that.
Yeah.
And sorry to leave y'all hanging, but I did want to talk about this. You got laid off, and this is the part where it's fun for me to do this stuff because I don't remember exactly what the sequence of stuff was. So let's see what you remember. I came up to you in the gym, right? And did I just flat say, what do you think about coming to work for us? What do you remember?
Well, I think you DM'd me.
Okay.
Pretty quickly, either the day of or the day after, or something like that. About,
I probably let it cool a little bit. Probably the day
we
after.
Should talk. And it wasn't out of nowhere. because we had a couple lunches previously when I was at the Roanoke Times.
No kidding.
When you talked to me, we went to McAdoo's a couple times.
Really? Tell me about that.
2015, 16, maybe.
Wow.
Somewhere in that range. And we talked about it a little bit, and it just didn't work out timing wise and everything at the time. But we had a previous discussion about this. So it wasn't completely out of the blue. But you would DM me immediately afterwards, and it was nice. First of all, it's nice to hear from everybody afterwards. Yeah, I skipped over that part.
You've got some great stories about people texting you and DMing you stuff that they sent to The Athletic.
Well,
right?
yeah, there's a lot of that, which, they're like, can't, like, showing me the screenshot of them canceling the subscription.
Because they cancel, and then The Athletic says, why are you canceling?
Right.
And that's when people unload it on them, right?
In my pettiness, I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm just this, above the fray with this. It brightened my spirits to see it. It was about a 48-hour period where I was pretty worthless. The coaches always say you have a 24-hour rule to get over a loss and stuff like that. I'm like, this is a big loss. This is a 48-hour rule. So I allowed myself a 48-hour pity party. Was pretty worthless. Was just like on the couch. Just like, I don't know, kind of stunned at this whole thing. I have to say that is a great rule. I see why coaches do that.
Yeah.
Because it forces you to move on after something like this. It's over. It's in the past. Move on. Get to the next thing. But the outpouring of support that I got, because, I put it on Twitter, they get laid off. You can't, that was one of the bad things about this whole thing is you can't really get laid off in anonymity in sports writing.
Yeah, I know.
You're a public figure, whether you like it or not. There's a lot of people that follow my Twitter account that are going to wonder why you're not covering Virginia Tech anymore.
Yeah, you were at 39,000 followers at the time.
It's going to be obvious that I'm not covering Virginia Tech anymore. So I put that out there. And the outpouring of responses was incredibly uplifting. I've likened it to, I'm not going to say like I died, but, like if you die in your funeral and people are giving these great eulogies about you, you'd like to be able to hear it. It's kind of like that. I was not dead. I got to hear all this stuff that people got to say out of me. And, 99% of it was positive. Of course, there's some jerks out there who will be, Twitter jerks as they tend to be. But, it's like, Mark Packer said nice things. Obviously, all my colleagues, nearly everybody at The Athletic reached out in some way or another. Stuart Mandel called me.
Wow.
David Teal, obviously, Aaron McFarland, Mike Nisley, the guys I work closely with here at Virginia Tech. Shane Beamer had a nice thing to say about me on Twitter, which is incredibly nice. And it was about 8 o'clock that night, something like that, the day it happened. And, I'm bummed out. I'm kind of sitting there on the couch and I get a call, number I don't recognize. And it's like a suburban Chicago phone number. I'm like, I don't know who this is.
Yeah, I do not know who that would be.
But it didn't say like potential spam. So I answer everything. And it was Jim Phillips, ACC commissioner.
Wow.
And, just like, this just doesn't define you or anything like this. This, you're a great reporter and you'll find something and you'll bounce back. And this is temporary. And you really see how he operates, how he is a good people person in that moment. And he didn't have to do that.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive.
But in that moment, I mean, it was incredibly meaningful. So soft spot in my heart for Jim Phillips for that.
Everybody remember that.
Yeah. But I forget where I was going with it, but it's an incredibly rough situation right away, but it was very uplifting to hear from all those people. And you were one of them in reaching out, and it was incredibly comforting to be like, hey, let's talk. Because I knew that could be a possibility.
Did anybody else in the space do that, or was it just me?
There were some other conversations I had. I had a talk with some tech alums that were trying to get in the NIL space a little bit. That had talked to me about some business ideas they had. I don't know if it actually ever got off the ground or anything like that, but it was a nice conversation to know that, hey, it could go this direction possibly. It's not necessarily sports writing, but it could be something kind of along the communication track there. CBS Sports guys, somebody at 247 had reached out, and there weren't opportunities at Virginia Tech, but there could have possibly been opportunities elsewhere. that's upping your life though, and moving somewhere else and starting over
Right.
on a beat. And that wasn't necessarily appealing to me. I mean, my wife has a great job here. We have a great mortgage and interest rate here. I mean, my daughter is in school and has friends around here. It's all these things you don't think about when you're coming up the ranks. And, I moved in succession pretty quickly. I was 20 months in Danville. It was 4 years in Lynchburg. I was 3 years in Auburn, and moving on and moving on and moving on. And I moved quite a bit in that time. And once you find a place and you settle down a little bit, you're like, I don't like packing up all my stuff all the time and moving somewhere new. And that when you have a family and a house and everything like that, you really don't want to do it again. So was not really intent on moving anywhere, which is why when you come in with the offer, it was pretty appealing.
So I do remember talking to you at the gym one day, and basically, I think I basically told you, well, we're going to make an offer. I'll send it to you. And that happened pretty quickly.
If I remember, I was doing reps of 15 at 225 on the bench press. I was in between those sets. I think I'm accurately remembering this.
No, I remember you squatting like 500 pounds.
Yeah, something like that. It was
and as usual, Chris Coleman walked by.
Weight.
As usual, Chris Coleman walked by and said, "You're not going horizontal. It doesn't count."
Exactly.
No, you were on the treadmill walking at your classic 2 miles an hour.
It's faster than that, but yeah.
So I think I walked up and said, "I'm going to send you an offer," and you said, "Okay." So back to the story I was telling hurriedly a few minutes ago. So I make up the offer. I know what Tech Sideline can do financially. I know what the readers and subscribers are going to support. So I hit send on the email, and I'm like, "All right, that's satisfying." Phone goes ding, and I look over at the phone, and it's a text from you, and you say, "That's a very generous offer. Thank you." And I was like, "Wow, talk about 2 packets of electrons that pass in the night." So I knew. So here's my viewpoint. One of the things that is sad about the modern media landscape is that people who are very good at their jobs, like you are, through no fault of their own, wind up adrift. And I believe that, and I've said this publicly before, I believe if you're good at what you do, you should get paid for it. And if you're really good at what you do, you should get paid well for it. And I know that a lot of customers agree. It's industry that doesn't agree. They want to pinch all the pennies and hire kids out of school and, pay them in the gig economy and load the thing up with advertising and produce crap and just churn through people. So I felt like you deserved that. I'm like, let's send him a really good financial offer. He deserves it. And the other thing we had on our side was that you didn't have to go anywhere and do anything. You just had to go from this to that. So when you sent that text, I was like, excellent. So he likes the financial part of it. And time passed. And more time passed. A week went by. Another week went by. And I thought to myself, okay. So I get it. He's going from, you went from newspapers, working for newspapers all those years and having the professional journalist mindset. And then The Athletic was really an extension of that. It was founded by people who had been cut loose from newspaper jobs and ESPN jobs and those kind of things. So it wasn't a fan site or anything like that. It was. Stuart Mandel. Does he pronounce it Mandel or Mandel?
Mandel, I think.
Interesting, because I went to high school with a girl whose last name was Handel, spelled the same way, and she insisted it's Handel, it's not, or Landel, it's not Landell. So anyway, back to the topic. He was a big name in the industry, so that brought a lot of legitimacy to it. And I had 2 thoughts. I thought, well, I get that he's probably struggling with transitioning from that to Tech Sideline. But the other thought I had was, and this is me talking to myself, you idiot, you need to meet his wife. You need to meet the wife and talk to her. There's 2 sides to this equation. So I think I came up to the gym and I was like, hey, I should probably meet your wife and talk to her about this. And I think you said, yeah, she thinks that would be a good idea. Is that what you recall?
Well, she always has more questions about things than I do.
Well, and
She's obviously less trusting about things than I am. She saw the layoff coming a year in advance before I did. So
yeah, you told me
better
that
instincts about this.
She told you to watch your back when it got sold in the New York Times.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. I think it's a couple things. First of all, when you make the offer, I just been knocked off my axis at that point. I got a severance for that, so I didn't need to rush into something else to pay the mortgage. So, it happened, and I'm like, I'm going to take a beat. I'm going to let it mellow for a second. I'm going to make a decision that's good for me in terms of what my career path should be here. Is that in journalism? It's like I said when I went to the Athletic, if it didn't work out there, like maybe this is a sign that journalism is just not a good career path.
Yeah, so somebody in the message board thread wanted to ask you that question. Did you think about leaving journalism and going into something else?
I thought about it, and then the other side of it is I don't know what I'm remotely qualified to do right now. I'm sort of in a, this is an old dog, new trick situation here. This is what I've been doing professionally for 20 years, and I still like it. I don't like the business of it sometimes, but I like the actual job itself. So I didn't, I came to the conclusion eventually that I wanted to continue to do that. But I just need a little bit of time. I need, a couple weeks to just like decompress, make sure that's exactly what I want to do. Because for both your sake and for my sake, I didn't want to rush into something else. Do it for 6 months and then realize this is just bad. I don't like this. I rushed into this, and it would have been, bad for me to do that. It would have been bad for you to hire me and then raise prices, and then I leave after that. It would have left a sour taste in everybody's mouth. So when I did it, I wanted to make sure that it was for the long haul.
You're committed to it.
So yeah, it took a little bit of time to consider that, and eventually, we met at the Cabo Fish Taco. Yeah. I remember all the eating places that we've met over the years.
Well, I remember that because I love Cabo Fish Taco.
But yeah, my wife kind of serves as my business manager in a lot of ways. I feel like she's looking out for my interests, and she has more questions about stuff than I do. She is a former reporter herself.
Yes, that's right. That's how you guys met, right?
So she has that instinct. Maybe more on the natural writer side than the natural reporter side of it. She comes in with, a laundry list of questions. So she had a bunch of questions for you, answered them all satisfactorily. So,
and I don't, and this gets back into me not remembering things. I don't even remember what the specific questions were. What I do remember is they were exactly the questions I expected. She asked about, and I was like, this, like, if she's doing her job right, she'll ask me this. And she asked me all that stuff. And I answered everything honestly, because I tell people all the time, I've just told you I don't remember a lot of stuff. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to be able to remember the lies I tell, But anyway, that's a disingenuous thing to say. Of course, I wanted to be honest with you and with her. So she did her job, and she fills a very similar role in your marriage that my wife does. I tend to be a little impulsive and just do stuff without thinking about it, and she checks me, keeps me from making mistakes a lot of the times, even though sometimes I find it annoying. I'm not saying you find Annie's due diligence annoying, but it just needs to happen. So I remember that. But the other thing I remember thinking is, I really hope he doesn't want to go into business for himself. And I remember throughout the course of the 2 or 3 weeks that we were talking about stuff and I had made the offer, I remember you saying something like, I don't want to do that. And you brought it up. I didn't ask. You remember that conversation?
Yeah. Well, a couple guys that had gotten laid off from the Athletic, Justin Ferguson at Auburn, Christian Capel got laid off at the same time I did at Washington. I mean, think about that. They laid off the Washington beat writer ahead of the year that they went to the national championship.
When they were getting ready to go to the playoff.
Great decision there. They had both gone the Substack route, which, is a model that's there and it's doable. And, my thought was the infrastructure is already set up at a place like Tech Sideline.
Yeah.
Are you going to add another pay site to the mix? I wonder what the marketplace is for something like that. If that's the case, then I'm covering everything all the time. There's a great weight and responsibility that comes with that you're always on. When something happens, you're going to be responsible for travel and credentialing and customer service when things aren't working right, or if something's, not up to some billing. Like, I know you deal with a lot of those issues. I don't want to deal with any of that stuff. So the idea that I could come into a place like Tech Sideline that had a built-in fan base, a place that was familiar with me. I mean, when I was at Roanoke, I would post stories. You asked me to post stories on the message boards all the time when I was there. Familiar with the staff, with you and Chris and David. This podcast setup. I mean, think about it. You're doing it on your own. You're going to have a podcast element. It's like, all right, then I got to produce this stuff. Then I got to put it out. I got to figure out how to get it on
spend the money,
iTunes and Spotify and all that stuff. I don't want to do
like I don't know if people know this, but there's $20,000 to $25,000.
Yeah,
in this.
I mean, it's just here I can come in and be the reporter, the senior writer, whatever you want to call it, and I don't have to worry about that other stuff.
Yeah.
And if I'm out of town for a week and go to Vegas and lose a lot of money at blackjack in a 15-minute period, there's other people here that are
hypothetical, right?
Yeah, hypothetically. there are other people here that will handle the Colin Schlee commitment. There was something appealing to that I felt like at other places when something would happen, I always had to be on, like, even if I was on vacation, like, I've got to address this.
Well,
somehow.
that was really, like, even newspapers now, the beat writers are alone on a beat and they have to report on everything.
Yeah. So the communal aspect of Virginia Tech was very appealing, or the Tech Sideline was very appealing, and being able to come on the staff, and there's other people doing other stuff. There's a lot of people handling the recruiting stuff. I don't like dealing with the recruiting stuff. I feel like it's ridiculous sometimes writing about these guys that he's committed. It's like, okay, is he?
He's 800% committed.
I remember that was a big thing at the Athletic, is they made this recruiting push, and they're like, we're going to do feature stories on these guys. And I remember right after they did that, and some of the feature stories I wrote, it's like Bryce Duke, he's gone. Mateus Carroll, he's gone. These guys leave before they ever make an impact here. And it's like, what are we doing?
Well, the one I always
writing
remember
this
is
stuff up.
I used to write those recruiting features, and back in the day, I did one on Kevin Jones, which was really an interview with his dad.
I referenced that. I read through that whole thing when I did my story on Kevin Jones' commitment the other day.
Yeah. And then I interviewed Justin Hamilton, which was great. Justin wound up having a long career at Tech. And I interviewed Will Hunt. And ironically, Will Hunt and Justin Hamilton didn't know each other and are like lifelong friends. They're in each other's weddings and things like that. Yeah, those guys are really tight. But, Will never turned out to be anything. But the one I really, to your point, was I remember doing a feature on a guy named Mike Brown, who was a defensive end out of Florida.
I remember that name.
And Mike was, everybody back then was going to be the next Corey Moore. Well, Mike was going to be the next Corey Moore. So I remember I talked to his coach, I talked to Mike, I probably talked to a family member, wrote up this big whole thing, and he never made a dent. He was probably there for about a year. And I remember being somewhere at some function, and Charlie Wiles, DL coach, and I said, Mike, it's Charlie, whatever happened with Mike Brown? And Charlie gave it the old, Mike was just in Coach Beamer's office just a little bit too much. And I didn't grill him for what that meant, but that's when it gets difficult putting a lot of work into a story.
Yeah, and part of my problem with it was like the framing of it. It's like, if you're just doing a story, it's like, well, here's this recruit, let me write it. But they'd always frame it as like, why so-and-so is the perfect fit for Virginia
they're going to be
Tech.
great.
It's like, we don't need to overhype this thing. We can just say that he committed to Virginia Tech. Here's a little bit about his story. Yeah. But it always had to be this, like, he's the perfect fit. Why he was number one on their boards. Like, he wasn't. Yeah. like I don't know why we're doing all this stuff. And especially now, in the transfer portal age, you feel like you really put a lot of effort in for nothing that's going to pay off. Yeah. Like, Tyree Saunders. Remember when he made his little media tour where he was reaching out to every writer? And
right.
I'm like, well, that's a recruit that actually wants to talk. I'll go do a story on him. So I did. And now he's on like his fourth school at this point. So, I prefer not writing those types of recruiting stories or dealing with the whole, it's moderately interesting to me, the recruiting aspect of it.
Well, it's more fun to look back and see what happened.
But the horse race aspect of it, and like, oh, right, this guy is going to be the next star of Virginia Tech. It's like, it never really works out that way. Yeah. And you look at some of the guys that rise up out of these recruiting classes. It's like, a couple of years ago, nobody was writing about Mansour Delane. like he was going to be
I
the
know.
star of that class, and yet he's the best one that
And
emerged from
he's
that
an
whole
All-American.
thing. So that not having to write those kind of recruiting stories here and having other people that handle all that stuff, I thought that was pretty appealing.
Yeah. So you just went over the reasons to come work for Tech Sideline, and some of that I've heard and some of that I haven't. And of course, one of the more attractive things was that you didn't have to move anywhere. You
Right.
just drive to a different place. And, for the record, folks, it's not like Andy and I see each other every day. This is very much a remote job. So what do you pop into the office maybe once a week or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't even have a desk here. I just work out in the main room.
Yeah,
and
you come
fine.
in-
And by the way, I'm fine with that. I have been untethered for, going back to my time at Auburn. So we're talking about 16 years now, where I've not had an office or go into a place specifically. The closest thing I had to an office at Roanoke was going to Panera Bread. Like when I needed the internet, when I was living at a place that before my wife moved up here and we got a place. So those are all the arguments to work for Tech Sideline. What in your head was the con? What were the arguments against working for us? Well, I think I'm very much an old school journalist in that sense. And, even though I've, done a lot of internet writing and blogging and podcasting and all the modern stuff that you have to do with that, it was still for traditional media outlets. I mean, even the Athletic, as forward thinking as it was still grounded in old school journalism.
Yeah.
And then I think, the hope for it when it started was like, this is sort of the new Sports Illustrated. Sports Illustrated had seeded that ground journalistically and has continued to just, throw gasoline on the flames of, the embers of what was previously Sports Illustrated.
So they burn brighter.
Embarrassing what that outlet has become. So they sort of, left that available there. And I think the Athletic could be that, and maybe still could be. I don't know if it's necessarily on the path to do that anymore with the direction they're going and some of the, I don't want to say clickbaity stuff, but some of the stuff that is less journalistically inclined than just like, we have to meet our numbers and get our hits and stuff like that. It's always the classic problem of chasing hits and audience and stuff like that. But, I'm very much an old school journalist type, and Tech Sideline, though an independent site, is still a fan site.
Yeah.
And it's still, I mean, you're a Virginia Tech grad and fan, and don't hide it.
David.
Chris Coleman is a Virginia Tech grad and fan, and doesn't hide it. David is a Virginia Tech grad, maybe a little bit more journalistically inclined because he, went through the SMA program.
Yeah.
I still think very positive coverage of Virginia Tech in that sense. And I'm from the mindset of, I don't care whether Virginia Tech wins or loses. I don't have an opinion of that one way or another. I'm there to cover it. I root for my story. I want the best story possible. When Virginia Tech was losing to Old Dominion in 2018, I know a lot of Virginia Tech fans were losing their minds. I would imagine you were probably losing your mind at that thing. I was sitting there watching that going, this is going to be a pretty good story.
Yeah.
So I think about it in a different sense. So coming to work for a site where obviously it's Virginia Tech fans all over the site, but, readers that follow you are fans anyway. But, when the management is like that and inclined to think that way, you wonder, how would an old school journalist fit into a spot like that? And honestly, I think it's worked fine.
Yeah.
And
So-
I don't expect or ask you guys to change, and I feel like you don't
we don't
expect
expect
or
or
ask
ask
me
you
to.
to
Like
change.
we coexist, and that's perfectly fine.
So let me jump in here. One of the things I do remember talking, I believe we talked about this at Cabo Fish Taco. Annie asked about that aspect of it, of us being at our core a fan publication, and you coming to, and I don't remember the exact question she asked, but what I remember answering is, listen, part of the reason we want to hire Andy is we need to move more in that other direction. We need to continue to move in that direction. It is, honestly speaking, it is this awkward dance we've done for literally decades now, where you have one foot in the journalistic pool and one foot in the fan pool. And, you know, sometimes both feet are over here and sometimes both feet are over there. It's this thing that we've never quite figured out or nailed, but it appears what we're doing appears to be working. But anyway, bringing you in, when we hired David, which was 2021, he graduated in 2021. We hired him that summer. I told him, just keep being David Cunningham. You know, you've been the managing editor for 3304. Just come over here and keep doing that stuff. And that brought more structure to us. And, you know, what some people don't realize is David works harder than anybody at this company. He's always on. He's always sending the tweets to us in the company. He's always the guy to see it first. And he manages all the content. He works very hard. So he brought that part to it. But I wanted your perspective from having worked for more traditional media. And I wanted you to continue to push us in that direction. And I quit wanting to be legitimized many years ago. I don't give a crap about that anymore. I just want people to keep reading, subscribing, and enjoying what we do. I've kind of let that part of it go. I do still get a little bit juiced when David appears on ACC Network talking to Packer. I had a buddy text me the other day. He's like, I'm listening to Andy on Sirius XM. It's great. And I was like, what? You are? He goes, yeah, I'm listening to Wes Durham and Roddy Jones and Andy's on. And he sends me a picture of his dashboard and it says Andy Bitter, Tech Sideline. Okay, that's pretty cool when you consider that this thing started in my spare time in the spare bedroom, me working from 10 o'clock to 1 a.m. But I don't get hung up on being legitimized anymore. But bringing in you does add that aspect to it. I always like it when the operation takes the next step. So was there anything other than that? Oh, no, let me ask you a more specific question. Was there a locker room aspect to it to where your buddies with Teal, Nizialek, Barber, all those guys, Norm Wood, who's no longer in the business, did you think at any point, if I make this jump, they're going to tease me or they're going to give me a hard time?
I don't think so. I think if it was 15 years ago, yes, but we're all journalists and we're all in the same boat with this thing. The industry is not great.
It's just
and I've used this analogy before. It's like you're running across a rope bridge. It's like Indiana Jones and like the planks are falling out behind you. Can you get to the other side before it falls out underneath you? That's what the industry is like. And I mean, you mentioned Norm. He's not in the industry anymore. Yeah. He left. Aaron McFarlane. He left. Nathan Waters.
Now who left and who got laid off?
None of those guys got laid off.
They all left.
But they all, read the room and go, I think Norm was a situation where like, I could take this buyout and get ahead of it because I see what's coming eventually. David Teal at Newport News for 35 years, whatever it was. Yeah. Venerated columnist there. You think that would be an asset to a newspaper. And, the buyout offer's on the table. And he's like, I'm going to get out before they get me. Yeah. And now he's at Richmond. He's continuing along in this whole thing. But I mean, a lot of, Mike Nizialek, you mentioned Mike Nizialek. He got laid off at Roanoke. Yeah. Briefly.
Well, that was bizarre.
In a weird, it's a situation where they had union discussions and then like they got past a period where they could no longer look at, when you're in discussions, you can't lay people off. So they finally came to an agreement and then they just lopped off the 10 most recent hires instead of going by merit or what, perhaps you need a Virginia Tech beat writer at the Roanoke freaking Times, right? So they finally came to their senses and brought him back. But he was also in a situation where like, well, I have this other opportunity to go somewhere else.
Well, you and
why would I stay at this newspaper that laid me off previously?
Yeah, so, I mean, you and he are friends, and I'm sure after
we
that
just
whole
went to
thing,
Vegas together.
Yeah,
so
I'm sure he thought to himself, "Oh, okay, I hear you, I get it."
Right. I mean,
I'm out of here as soon as I can get out of here.
That's the thing. So I think, all these, capital J journalists, if you want to put it that direction, people that like went to school for this thing and are of the, neutrality mindset when you're covering programs. I think we've seen the industry for the last 25 years, the furloughs and the layoffs, and, somehow I had avoided layoffs at I think there were probably 6 or 7 rounds of layoffs at various newspapers that I was at before I got laid off of the Athletic. Which was supposed to
irony of it,
redo the whole sports writing. No, we're going to change it from newspapers. It's like, you're the exact same thing. You got bought out by a newspaper. What do? They lay people off. So, I think it's just the trend of the industry that, newspapers are in rough shape. I don't think people look down at it. It's different. It's not something I would have thought of 20 years ago, but I also think you look at the industry and, you want to work somewhere that you can produce good content and great stories, and you want to deliver it to a passionate fan base. And where is there a more passionate fan base than on fan sites like this? And if
as a writer, you just want people to pay attention.
Right, exactly. And if you bring it to a passionate fan base, good journalistic content, they're going to eat it up. And to have somebody in charge like yourself, who is also a passionate fan about this and understands that there's a market for this, and that, people will spend their money if you dedicate the coverage to it. I think that's good for the business model. Whereas you look at other places where it's like, Virginia Tech was an afterthought to the Athletic over time. I think it becomes an afterthought sometimes to newspapers, where they're just looking at the bottom line and, we can't exceed this travel expense, going somewhere.
I think Annie asked me about that, and you may have asked me about that. What about travel? And I was like, well, we've never traveled to Miami or Boston, but we're going to have to suck it up and start traveling.
Well, 2 weeks ago, I go, hey, should we go to Amelia Island? And you're like, yeah.
Hell yeah.
Let's go to the ACC meeting. So I'm going there next week.
Yeah.
And I know it was a bit more of a battle for other people that are going down there. So,
So I did negotiate with you. I was like, if you take the company car instead of flying, that's
right.
the deal.
And it's doable. It's an 8-hour drive getting down there. Yeah. It's not ideal, but it's doable. So, I think I want to continue to produce great content. What's a place that will allow me to do that? Yeah. And this was a place that allowed me to do that. Whereas you were hitting a lot of restrictions at newspapers and the Athletic, and they're like, it doesn't fit our bottom line. I think at a place like this, that's, more of a boutique type spot. It's not trying to do a national reach. It is very much localized and regionalized, and that's where it's going to stay. You guys aren't going to branch out and all of a sudden start covering Tennessee or something like that. That you were dedicated and focused to Virginia Tech. Like right when I got hired, you sent me the Final Four with David. Like, I think my pitch was like, what if they win this thing?
Oh yeah.
You're going to want to be there. That's always my pitch for, what if this happens and we're not there?
Yeah.
And no resistance whatsoever. You're just like, book the flight, go down and do it. And it would be hurdle after hurdle after hurdle at other places trying to do this. And like, well, how can we save money on this thing? It's like, listen, I'm not going to fly first class or something like that, but I would like to go down there and cover it. And if it ended the way that Hokies fans wanted to, and they win a national championship, first national championship for the program, you want to be there covering that kind of stuff. And I think like other outlets don't necessarily think that way, whereas I think Tech Sideline does think that way.
Yeah, I'm a pretty soft touch too. Now the interesting thing about that is that when you ask me, can I travel to this? I own the company, so you're actually spending my money, me, Will Stewart. So it's funny, you can work for a newspaper where it's not actually your editor's money or your boss's money or whatever, and they fight it harder than a guy who's actually letting you spend his money. So for Tech Sideline fans, if I remember my spreadsheet from last year correctly, we spent, I think it was close to $30,000 on travel last year. So that's a new frontier for us. And like David, this past basketball season, I don't remember the exact trip, but he took the company car and he went to Orlando to watch the men play.
Like Orlando and Auburn,
and then LSU to see the women, and then drove back. It was like 2,600 miles he drove or something like that. And of course, he's staying in hotels and things like that. So it's I knew when we hired you, I was just going to start biting the bullet on that. We were getting big enough, and it's also getting to where, like, I remember back in 1999 when Tech went to the national championship game, the massive amount of media that went down there. The Roanoke Times sent, Bogacic was probably still there. They sent Bogacic, Randy King, probably McFarling was there.
I think he was in the bureau. He might still be in college at that point.
Yeah. Giving up 6 home runs in one game.
Yeah. The famed Marshall McDougal day. Well, that's the other part about, you look at the landscape. When I first started covering Virginia Tech, it was in the fall of 2011. Washington Post had a dedicated guy down here.
Yeah.
Who covered UVA and Virginia Tech.
Who was that? I don't remember.
It was Mark Giannotto.
Yeah, Mark
now
Giannotto.
Memphis columnist, I think sports editor too.
So he's still in the industry?
He is.
Okay.
Norm Wood in Newport News, Daryl Slater, Richmond Times-Dispatch.
Yeah.
Nathan Waters would cover it for Fredericksburg at that time, I believe. Eventually, Chris Lang would cover it for Lynchburg. Bucky Dent would come up from Bristol.
Yeah.
Before I got here, it was Kyle Tucker for the Virginia Pilot, Randy King for the Roanoke Times. When I got hired, it was joint. Those papers were owned by the same company. They hired a joint position. That became my thing. And that's where the whole Twitter fiasco was born out of that whole thing.
Are you allowed to talk about that?
Yeah, I can talk about that.
Okay.
Fredericksburg Steve DeShaza would come down quite a bit, cover stuff. So, I mean, just the sheer number of, and obviously Teal coming in as a columnist from Newport News as well. Just think of the number of people that I just listed there. Well, and now you go into a press conference and it's me and it's David and it's Damian Storlett.
But David Cunningham.
Times. Yeah.
And Damian from the Roanoke Times. And that's it. And student journalists.
It's the 247 has their proxies who are there, but the main guys are not local covering this stuff. That's a drastic difference. And even Roanoke, I mean, Damian is stretched thin.
Yeah.
He is covering rail yard dogs, high schools. I would imagine some Salem Sox coming up this summer. When I was there, it was Virginia Tech football and only Virginia Tech football. Yeah. Basically from July to February. And then I'd help out with some high school stuff come playoff time, as long as it didn't conflict with spring football. I mean, that is how much the beat has changed. It just kind of shows you the traditional outlets have abandoned coverage. And, part of that is tied to Virginia Tech's success. We're not talking about
lack thereof.
Yeah, we're not talking about a top 10 program anymore. And if they were up there in the national conversation, perhaps that would be different. But I mean, these papers don't cover this program like that anymore, and it's created opportunities like that, I think, for Tech Sideline to fill that void.
So let me talk to that for a minute. A couple things. First of all, the first game we ever worked as credentialed media was the 2012 Georgia Tech football game, and I went into the press box, and that press box was full.
Yeah,
full. It's a
pretty big press box too.
There were 7 or 8 pro scouts there along the front row to see Logan Thomas, because he'd had a really good 2011. I remember just everybody you listed was there. I sat next to Heather Dinich. It was just, 3 or 4 rows deep, and it was full from end to end. And the last time I was in the press box, just put your stuff over here. There's plenty of room over here.
It is pretty empty.
Yeah.
To the point where I wonder if in future renovations they make it smaller.
Chop it smaller. Yeah, that makes sense.
Use some of it as premium seating.
Oh,
wouldn't surprise me.
How about they put more bathrooms in?
They could use more than one bathroom that's shared with the donors.
And so, so it's interesting. A thought I just had in this discussion was, the traditional media climate back in the 90s created the opportunity for, in air quotes, the fan sites, because nobody had ever read somebody writing about, say, Virginia Tech football from a fan perspective. It was all a journalist perspective. So in the beginning, that door was open. And if you were...
It was the Bill Simmons approach. I mean, he really revolutionized the fan writer side of that thing. And to be able to write it with a bias, I feel like he was sort of the godfather of that. So I think he spawned a generation of people. They're like, I can write that way, be a fan of the team, and write passionately about that.
I'll take your word for it. I never thought that deeply about it. I just programmed a website and started writing. And so if you were first to market and you were decent and you worked hard, there was an opportunity. And now there's an opportunity because traditional media is continuing to get smaller and smaller. Traditional written media, the YouTube and social media stuff is just exploding. There's just all kinds of people doing that stuff. But our bread and butter continues to be the written subscription content that brings in more money than anything. It's what we all like doing. And you also knew coming to Tech Sideline, we weren't going to do the 7-paragraph, 200-word clickbait crap. You could produce long-form content. So anything to add to that?
Not really.
Not
I
really.
don't know.
So it took about 3 weeks from the original offer for you to finally say sure. And that was just you just said you wanted to make the right decision. Yeah. And I appreciate that. I don't want to bring all these subscribers on board and then have you leave. So let's scroll down a thread. There's some guys ladies and gentlemen on the message board that want me to ask you some things. I'm sorry, folks, I didn't write this stuff down ahead of time. My daughter graduated yesterday. I was busy all night last night. Boy, these are long posts. So 1 year in, any surprises, positive or negative? Has it been everything you thought?
I think it has been everything I thought. I don't think there have been really too many surprises with it.
How easy of a boss
part,
am I, right?
Well, I mean, in large part because you're very easy to work for, where it's just like, here's my idea, and you're just like, go do it. Don't really meet any resistance on that front, editorially or in terms of travel or going places. If I have an idea, it was the heart of the basketball season where David's up to his eyeballs covering women's basketball in the tournament and the whole Kenny Brooks thing.
Ugh.
And in between those two games, Tech has an NIT game at Columbus, and I'm just like, why don't I go up there and cover that? And you're like, yeah. We have a company car for that reason. You can go up there. It's drivable. It's closer than Pittsburgh, which I covered a couple weeks prior.
Yeah, that drive to Columbus is not bad.
So we just shot up there, covered it, came back, covered some more women's basketball, and it's very easy to work here because I don't think I'm met with a lot or any no's in terms of pitching ideas or pitching travel or anything like that. And those impediments were there a lot at previous places. So it's nice not to have to butt up against a wall like that.
Well, and constantly arguing your case eats up time. So if you here's one from Lake Ridge Hokie. If you could go back to your college days, and I wanted to ask you a related question, would you still have picked to be a journalist? And my related question is, I remember talking to Bill Roth and guys like Evan Hughes and Jake Lyman and Giovanni Heater. They always wanted to be play-by-play guys. When they were kids, they listened to the radio or they watched TV and they went, wow, I want to do that. When did you decide you wanted to be a sports writer?
Yeah, I always liked sports. I was always the guy the kid who would keep official scores at baseball games and stuff like that. To the point where, if I had to go to the bathroom, I would hand it to my parents. I'm like, keep track while I am gone, for the purpose of which I don't even know why. I'm not going to go back over those box scores later or something like that. But I was pretty dedicated to it, so I always liked it. My freshman year, I was kind of at Wisconsin. This is 1998 at this point.
Your freshman year in.
At college in Wisconsin. So it was the spring, it was 1998. And I'm trying to find something to do. You get to college, you're kind of trying to find your.
So were you just
place.
General studies your freshman year? Okay.
Yeah. I liked history, so I took a lot of history classes. I'm also a history major, just because I took enough classes.
Chris Coleman graduated with a degree in history. And one of the reasons I hired Chris was he worked for us as an intern. And all of the history papers he had to write, he could write. He had
Right.
he had basic writings, not basic. He had well-developed writing skills. So I'm not surprised to hear you say that.
I went to college. I go, what are the two most useless majors I can come up with? And journalism and history were the two that I guess.
You know, Chris Coleman, I hired
It's
cheap.
like if I was in psychology too, that might have been another one. But
see, I hired Chris cheap because I knew he had no other options. He was a history major.
yeah, well, I was there and I was like, you know, a lot of guys go into frats and stuff like that, and I was like, I don't want to do that. It just wasn't for me, and I was like trying to find something to do, and I don't exactly know how, but I, you know, went and checked in with the college newspaper, the Badger Herald. They actually had two at Wisconsin, the Daily Cardinal, which was affiliated with the school, and the Badger Herald, which was an independent site, an independent newspaper. And yeah, I think my first assignment was covering a soccer game, women's soccer game. I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing here. They're like, just go write about the goal. And of course, it was a 0-0 tie. So, you know, like, I don't know what I'm doing here with this thing. But I caught on.
Is that called a draw in soccer?
Yeah, I caught on eventually.
0-0.
And kind of, you know, you start doing Big Ten notebooks. They used to have a Big Ten teleconference where you have to listen and like hit a button to rewind and like type it out and stuff like that. And I think it was my junior year. Yeah, it was my junior year. You know, I got my first beat, and I was covering the men's basketball team, and they were a so-so team, mediocre team, borderline tournament team, and then they kind of turned it on at the end of the season, made the tournament. They went on a run, and they made the Final Four. And I was in Salt Lake City covering it. I went to Albuquerque for the next round covering it. I went to Indianapolis for the Final Four, and I'm like,
this like the paper you work for paid for that?
Badger Herald sent us everywhere. I'm like, this is kind of cool. This is fun. The coach of that team was Dick Bennett. A team manager at the end of the bench that they, you know, normally you're grabbing towels and stuff like that. This particular individual was not doing that. They sort of got an extra assistant coach on the end of the bench, Tony Bennett, when he got into coaching following his NBA career, or his playing career. But I cover that team. They make the Final Four. I'm like, that's kind of cool. So traveling to these places, covering the stuff, it's fun.
Yeah, let me jump in there and say that, you know, you sit in the stands and you're a certain number of rows up and you watch. And then when you are on the actual floor, the energy down there is pretty tremendous. The noise.
Back when they let you sit down.
Yeah, back when they actually let you sit.
NCAA tournament still mandates that you sit down there.
Yeah.
Which is nice.
Your average person doesn't understand that when a basketball bounces off the floor, it's a vibration. It's a noise. Just the athletes hitting the floor and the speed that they move. And we're just talking college athletes. We're not even talking pro athletes. And so you look at guys like Ivan Morozov, our photographer, John Fleming, our photographer. They just, sometimes I wonder about those guys because they shoot game after game after game after game, thousands upon thousands of photos, but just the energy of being there, I get it, you know, and every once in a while you get that shot. So it's and like, I don't have a whole lot of courtside experiences, but it's kind of a long story, so I won't tell it, but I was behind the Virginia Tech bench when they played Alabama in the NCAA tournament up in Pittsburgh. I was right behind Buzz Williams. And
when he went crazy and got that technical after he like threw all the papers around.
I do not believe he got the technical, what I'm about to describe, but he turned around and he slammed his water bottle down on the scorer's table, like pretty much right in front of me. And I think I was looking over there or looking down or something. So when that stuff's happening right around you and you can hear and see everything, it is very cool. So I totally get that.
Yeah, no, I mean, that sort of sparked the interest. And, you know, I had worked, I've really worked like 3 jobs in my life. I worked at a movie theater when I was in high school.
At the mall.
Prince used to come to that movie theater late at night, by the way. Prince was from the town over.
Did you ever see him?
Prairie. I saw like his cape as he came around the corner. He would come in through the exit, and then like his security would come in and get concessions for him. And like his limo would be outside, like running the entire time in case there's like an assassination attempt on Prince or something like that. They had to rush him out there. But I tell that story and people are like, BS. There's no way that's true. I was in college. And I told my friends about this. They're like, yeah, right. And Prince was on Total Request Live with Carson Daly. And Carson Daly asked me, he's like, how do you what do you do for fun? Like, how can you just be like a normal person? How do you go to movies or something like that? And Prince goes, so there's actually this small theater near where I live that stays open late. And I was like, thank you.
Yes.
Vindication.
Yes.
It was the most vindicated I've ever been in my life. So Eden Prairie East, that is a true story about Prince. But anyway, high school job was working in a movie theater. College job, in the summer, I delivered pizzas for Papa John's, and now sports writer. So free movies, free pizza, free sports. These are the three things in my life that I've been focused on. But I've worked temporary jobs and stuff like that, where it's like you're in an office and it just sucks. It's just soul crushing to be in there. And you got to wear like a tie, and you're in there and you're like filing stuff. And
I've worked in cubicles for 7 years. It wasn't all bad.
It's horrible to me. And I'm just sitting there like looking at the clock, like, when do I get out of here? And when I was doing the sports writing stuff, like, you're not in an office, you're out. I'm watching sports. Like, this could be a job. And my dad's advice was like, if you do something you like, money will find a way. You'll find a way to make a career out of it.
Yeah.
And I always took that to heart. And like, believe me, the money has not always been there. It eventually has been all right. It was a long slog to get there, but eventually over time, I'm like, I think I could do this for a career. This could be a fun career to do. So eventually I went that path, and it wasn't easy. I moved back home after I graduated for 4 months, and I was delivering pizzas, and that's not a glamorous lifestyle. I moved to Danville, Virginia, not exactly New York, when you're going out there. When
you were delivering pizzas, did anybody ever answer the door naked? Did that ever happen to you?
No.
No? I'm sorry.
Not that I recall. I feel like I would remember that. But, you do that, and you kind of work your way up. And it was not a glamorous lifestyle, sports writing to start, and it's still not. But, I've enjoyed it. I did. And you talk about the games. You still get a juice going to the games. Like, you're there, you're at the event. It's cool driving into those stadiums on Saturdays and seeing all the people around, and you get energized by that. I've covered a lot more basketball this year than I have in forever. And when I'm there, you miss it, and you're in those environments. Like, I only get 12, 13 games a year for football. So supplementing that with some basketball to be in those venues, like the off-season stuff and the transactional stuff, it kind of gets boring to me.
It's
and
tough,
it gets repetitive.
Yeah.
And it's like, man, we're talking about this again. But when you're at the games, there is a singular goal. There's a result that comes from that. There's drama that unfolds in front of you on the field.
There's analysis to be done.
And my job is to get to sit there and write about that and chronicle that for, a rabid fan base that wants to read about that stuff. I mean, that's the part of the job that I really like.
Yeah, and that's part of what you mentioned is the actual downside of doing what we do. And cry me a river. We do have to produce content all year round. Whereas a newspaper, when the season's ended, you'd quit covering Virginia Tech football and Virginia Tech basketball, but we have to write about that stuff.
Well, not at the Roanoke Times.
Yeah.
Our initial, when I was hired there, the original aim was something on Virginia Tech football every day.
Right.
And I did that even through the summer, even on Sundays and Saturdays. I would come up with something. Yeah. It might have been a small thing. It might have been like, hey, check out this article on this other site. But it was something every single day. And I took pride in doing that for a while. And then, my daughter was born in 2016, and life changes a bit at that point. And you kind of pull back from the everyday thing. It's like, all right, we're going to take weekends off with this stuff. I'll still produce something every single day during the week. And now, being at a site like Tech Sideline, there's something every day, but I don't have to produce all of it.
Right.
We're at the point where there's softball, baseball going all the time. I can kind of chime in with football periodically at this time of the season. So, yeah, it's a better cadence than it was before.
You once told me, if I remember correctly, words to the effect of that you like knowing a program inside and out. Like, you've been covering this program for many years now. And I get that. I've been a fan since the early 80s. So I've been following this program, either writing about it or just following it for over 40 years. And it's cool knowing all the historical stuff. And that was another thing you thought about. I think coming to work for us is you could continue to be the expert. You didn't have to go somewhere new. I remember when Bill Roth went to UCLA for that 1 year, Bill told me one time he was, I don't remember exactly how I phrased it, but he was afraid of being on the air and making a mistake because he was new to UCLA.
Right. Or
being on the air and not having all of that vast background of knowledge to be able to add context to something. That was something that he was concerned about.
Yeah. And, I thought about that. You go somewhere else, you start. It's not always starting over with sources within the program and understanding it, but it's understanding the whole new program's history. When I went to cover Auburn, I didn't even know where Auburn was when I went down there initially. In a lot of ways, I didn't even know what I was getting into because they are so crazy down there about their football. But now that I've worked here and, I've been around Virginia Tech for 20 plus years. I've covered it as my primary beat for, this will be year 13 and a half, 14 coming up this fall.
Yeah.
I've written a book about the program.
Yeah.
Obviously history with Frank Beamer and Bud Foster, and you get a further history lesson when you talk to people like Phil O'Mazian, who is just a wealth of knowledge about the program. I mean, you feel like you have the history here. And that's a nice thing. That's an asset too, as a writer. Like you said, I have a pretty good knowledge of past games. I remember, for some reason, I can remember them very well, and like the sequence of stuff. And
I used to.
And that's probably going to slip here in the next couple of years as I get into my
dude.
later
It's coming.
40s. I even now I can already sense a little less sharp in some of that stuff, but I have a good way of visualizing past games that I've covered. So the fact that I've covered every game since what was the first one I covered here? It might have been that Wake Forest road game in 2011. Every game since then, it's over 100 straight, something like that.
Yeah.
It's nice to have that, Rolodex of games and
So
memories.
we really do have to fly you everywhere. We don't want to break the streak.
Yeah. And there are some flights this year too, Miami, Stanford coming up. So.
All right, so let's add Nova Hokie 95 wants me, and other people want me to ask you the great Twitter war with the Roanoke Times. Now that happened when you left the Roanoke Times and went to the Athletic. Did you even change your Twitter handle?
No, handle was the same. Andy Bitter VT.
Yeah,
it's been the same thing. That was ridiculous to start off.
So for people not familiar with the story, fill them in. When you left, they wanted to keep your Twitter account at the Roanoke Times.
I told them I was leaving, and they're like, all right, give us the password to the Twitter account. I'm like, it's not yours. I actually went in for like an exit meeting at Roanoke, and the managing editor and the city editor, whatever, I can't remember who it was, but they both sat me down. That was the only thing they wanted to talk about. It was like, okay, this is our Twitter account. I'm like,
how many followers did you have at the time?
20,000, 25,000. I can't.
For some reason, I think 24 or 25K.
Yeah. The oddness of it is when I first got hired, remember it was a joint position between Norfolk and Roanoke. Kyle Tucker was the previous writer. Randy King didn't have a Twitter account. Kyle did. And this was sort of in the infancy of Twitter at that point still. So, when you left a job, it wasn't quite clear what you would do with the Twitter account.
Yeah.
Like Kyle started one and it had like 3,000 followers or something like that, 4,000. But they were all Virginia Tech fans, and he was going to cover Kentucky. So I was like, do I take this with me or do I leave it? So critically in this whole thing, I knew Kyle previously because I had been in Virginia. We had known each other. So when I'm coming up to the job here, he's like, here, you can have this Twitter account.
Oh, that is important.
Kyle started the account. It was not a company account. Kyle never gave the password or permission of ownership of the Twitter account to he worked for Norfolk, the Virginian pilot at the time. So the Roanoke Times wasn't even involved in this transaction as you should say, with
Interesting.
the Twitter account. So he sent it to me on his personal email. I still have the email. I don't delete emails, and this came in very handy when litigation came about this whole thing. He doesn't delete emails. He also has it, so that came in handy. So he gave me the Twitter account. He's like, here's the login. You can change the password. It's yours. So I come in, and the only discussion I had when I came in was about what to call it, because it was, obviously Kyle Tucker VP or something like that when I came in. And, when I started working here, Roanoke and Norfolk, because it was a shared position, they wanted to be like very clear that, don't promote one over the other. So it's like, do I be Andy Bitter RT or Andy Bitter VP? They didn't want it to lean one way or another.
Was just Andy Bitter taken?
Yeah, it was. It's still out. There's some site that's not even used by anything.
The Hokie Central Twitter username is taken. The guy tweeted like 3 times in 2009, and I DM him and he doesn't answer. And of course, Twitter just sits there and lets it exist.
Right.
I want it. So
my compromise is that, how about I just call it Andy Bitter VT? I cover Virginia Tech. And that's led to further confusion later down the line because people think I'm like a fan or like, oh, you're just biased because look, Andy Bitter VT, Danny Cannell specifically, moron that he is, misunderstanding everything.
That's out there.
So yeah, that is how I got the Twitter account. And then, at a certain point, I think it was 2015, going into 2016, see, how did it work? Roanoke was bought by somebody else, but the Virginia Pilot was not. So my split employment was no longer going to work. I was going to have to work for one or the other. I ended up working for Roanoke. Virginia Pilot still syndicated my coverage for like a year before they stopped doing that. And then I ended up leaving the Roanoke Times later. And the people at Roanoke are like, okay, well, give us the Twitter account back. I'm like, it was never yours to begin with. Like that was the confusion. In their lawsuit, they made it sound like they gave me the password and gave me the Twitter account. That was never the case, but that's how it was reported initially. And that's why a lot of the initial reporting of it was like, oh, this could be an interesting case and ownership of the account.
Landmark case.
Yeah, landmark case. And in social media is like, does it belong to the person who built up the account or does it belong to the newspaper that supplied it? But that was not factual. The facts of the case was just mere ownership. I owned it from the second Kyle Tucker gave it to me, and therefore never had to give it back. They gave me a computer. I gave that back. They didn't give me a Twitter
actually
account.
Go to court?
This went to court.
It was settled in
federal court. Yeah. And it was through mediation eventually because it was. I think the judge got it as like, this is just effing ridiculous. Are you guys serious with this whole thing? So eventually I went to mediation and like the media, like, I'm just like, you're not getting the account back. So that's where we'll start, and get it back. You're not getting it because it was never yours to begin with. So I'm just going to continue operating this thing. And then you guys can figure out what the heck else you need. I think, the funny part was Mike Nisley gets hired to replace me. And, they're like, oh yeah, we got this, like Twitter account, whether he's going to tweet on his own account or something else. We got this small issue we got to take care of. And like the second day he was there was when the Twitter, like lawsuit becomes news like everywhere. It's like, what the heck? Like that was the small issue that you guys had to deal with. So yeah, I kept in like part of the mediation was like, I would retweet like 2 of his articles or something like that. So I did it like the first day. It's like, okay, whatever. And that was it. And we moved on. Guy, right? And it was the most ridiculous thing ever. And it was never going to be this landmark case about, journalists, whether they have, by working on the account, they assume ownership of the account. It was never a case like that. So I think it got blown out of proportion, but I think even more so than what it actually was.
Yeah. I mean, it's just understood these days that people own their Twitter accounts, not the organizations.
Well, now it's not even a question. When you move somewhere else, you just take it with.
Yeah. So this could kind of blow up. Best memories of interviews with 3D Key Shaker. Best memories of interviews with coaches or players in the past. And I guess I wanted to ask, are there any? Let's start with the athletes because a lot of the athletes aren't good interviews.
Yeah.
But which ones are? And I specifically remember Bill Ross saying one time about Will Fuhrer. He said Will was a really bright, well-educated guy. You never knew what you were going to wind up talking about.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is they have changed the interview structure so much.
Oh yeah, it's awful.
You're standing there at the podium. They're in front of a bank of cameras. It never feels like you're talking to them one-on-one. And it used to be, they used to have that academic room that was overlooking the practice fields.
Yeah.
Now it's like offices. It's like staff offices because they're so jam-packed with people over there that they have to put them somewhere. So that's no longer like a study room. But before, it's up by the players' lounge, and that's where we would do the post-practice interviews. And they would bring guys up there, and they'd be seated at tables around the room, and you can kind of work the room.
Yeah, we have a ton of videos of Chris Coleman just walking around.
Not everything had to be on camera for the official Virginia Tech site with a backdrop with the official Virginia Tech logo and sponsors and all that nonsense that they have to put into their own videos. You could just talk to guys.
Yeah.
And some interesting stuff came out of those conversations. And James Gale was really good back in the day.
He's a trip.
Jack Tyler was really good. Anton Exum was really good. They were just guys that when they would come in, you're like, all right, we're just going to talk for a while. Jack Tyler would purposely come in like last, and he'd be there for like 10, 12 minutes. Like you could tell future coach in the making when that was the case. I remember James Gale coming in, and it was a rivalry week with UVA. And it's Norm Wood and
James Gale at his best.
Norm Wood and I are interviewing him. And there was a quote that he had where like Virginia had this countdown clock to the game. And James Gale's quote was, "We don't have a clock, we have a cup." That was the quote. But as I remember it, and Norm will back me up on this, is we're sitting there interviewing him. And, we're talking, and we're like, yeah, they have this interview clock or this countdown clock. You have anything like that? And James, we don't have a clock. And then Norm just goes, you guys have a cup. It's like, James like kind of laughs. He's like, yeah, we don't have a clock. We have a cup. So like Norm manufactured that
fed
quote.
Him the line.
Yeah, it was basically him feeding the line, and James went along with it. And then the quote comes out. I was like, oh man, talking trash here, James Gale, because he had that reputation for talking trash. But that was and that's harmless stuff. And this is the kind of stuff I feel like they've gone away with, that you miss those interactions. And I feel like I knew James Gale, and not like in a deep sense we had like this great relationship, but like James Gale and Exum and Jack Tyler, I could talk to those guys, and that's less so now. It's so guarded, and I feel like you don't have that those people view you as the enemy. A lot of times you don't have that relationship. I feel like it's been that way for a while.
Yeah, and there are a couple things that fed into that. Number one was when Kyle Tucker used to when he first started his original blog, he'd hang out, and I think he'd pretty much grab the players coming off the field after practice. And that went sideways one time. I don't remember the details. If Chris Coleman was sitting here, he'd be like, oh yeah, that's when so-and-so said such and such. So that, I think they clamped down some then, but that was a long time ago. And there was another one that just went through my mind that I can't. Oh, were you around for the Purnell Sturdivant thing? I think it was Purnell Sturdivant.
I wasn't here for that.
I think he quote unquote, slipped up in front of the press one time and started talking about how easy the offense was to defend back when Brian Steinspring was coordinating.
Okay.
These are the things that coaches do not want players saying.
Right. I feel like the instances of that are so few and far between of what the benefits of having open access like that would be like, that it's just such a controlled message now, and it's needless.
Yeah.
You don't need to do this. You're actually stunting these guys from being, effective communicators over time, especially now when, they have their own brands and things like that. I mean, they want to be out there.
Get them a chance to pitch their stuff.
They want to be out there. Now now they can't stop them now if there's an NIL opportunity from going out and talking, which is like even crazier that they're so restrictive with formal media. It's like, Monsieur Delane went and did a podcast as a freshman because there was an NIL opportunity. And yet when we would request Monsieur Delane as a freshman, they go, we have a no freshman can't talk policy. And it's like, are you guys seeing what's wrong with this picture here? And I feel like if I was a coach, I would be less restrictive with that. Because what if you're a freshman? You're like, okay, I'm going to come in there and I can't talk to the media. How am I going to get my brand out there?
This is neither here nor there, but it reminds me of, I think this was back when Tyrod Taylor was in school, And I got the idea of, selling some of Tech Sideline's photography. That, although we didn't have access when Tyrod was around, but I think we did have some pictures. So I got to thinking about that, and then I was told, no, you can't do that because these are college athletes, and you can't make money off of their, you can't sell a Tyrod Taylor poster. And then Virginia Tech started promoting a website. I don't remember what the name of it was, but it was selling posters of current Virginia Tech athletes, like way back in the day. So you can't do it, but under certain circumstances we can. Who were one of some of your favorite coaches to interview?
Charlie Wiles.
Yeah.
He's at the top of the list just because he's so genuine.
Yeah.
And can't be anything other than genuine, even when it's to his detriment sometimes. There was, I think it was Daddy Nicholas got suspended for something or other. And we're talking to Charlie and all the writers beforehand. It's like, all right, we're going to get this out of Charlie because Charlie can't help himself. He's going to talk. And they actually printed out a little thing for him to say, because we were trying to get him to say this was a disciplinary thing, because he was not playing. So we were trying to figure it out. And it's it's between him and Coach Beamer, it's a thing that's going on. It's I'm just going to stick to the sheet. And then he goes back to the sheet and reads what was on the sheet exactly. But he had already slipped up and said it was a disciplinary thing. But that's not the reason I like talking to Charlie. It's you talk to Charlie. I saw him at the movie theater with his son one time. Then we came back to, I've told this story before, but come back to the next interview session. I'm like, so what'd you see? And he's like, Straight Outta Compton. I see Straight Outta Compton. He gave this big, long movie review about it. And he's like, it's really interesting, man. You see these guys and they're just products of their environment and what they're rapping about. And, if you're in the country, you might rap about drinking some clear, shooting a squirrel. And these guys, they're rapping about slinging a little rock. And it's Charlie and his country accent. And it is so genuine and perfect. I think Jason Stamm still has that on video somewhere. That was the same day that we found out that they were going to try to fine players for uniform violations and stuff. Yeah. And Bud stepped into it by saying, yeah, we're going to fine them a little bit. And it's and they were like, oh, who's the source on this? It's the source was the video screen that you guys had up in the thing that said the number of fines and what the fine structure was.
I stood there and looked at that and I was like, wow, look at that.
So ridiculous. But that was the same day that Bud kind of stepped in there. So it got lost in the shuffle. But, Charlie Wiles giving his review of Straight Outta Compton was great. And then the next time we came back, and he was interviewed again. We're like, so you see any good movies? He's like, oh, I'm the movie guy. I see one movie. I review the movies now.
Oh, did you ever get a chance to interview Dax Hollifield one-on-one?
A little bit, not a ton one-on-one.
I ran it. I wound up at one of the media days. I wound up with Dax one-on-one, and Dax has, if he's got a filter, it's a very coarse filter. Most stuff gets through it.
Yeah, he can go. He can talk. Yeah. Pretty good interview.
So here's one from All Right Guy. He basically is asking, you've been covering Virginia Tech for so long, and now you're working for Tech Sideline. Are you finding it any more difficult to remain objective? Do you find you need to keep the Hokie administration at arm's length with a strictly business relationship? As you get around this program more and more and more, I'll leave you to answer the question as asked. Do you find it any more difficult to remain objective?
I don't think it's more difficult because I'm just sort of programmed that way. That, that's how it's going to be. I'm not going to be a fan of the school I cover because I feel like that, colors your coverage. And that's not what people want, right? I'm going to say it like it is because that's the coverage people want. And I think that's part of it. You look at these the Virginia Tech website expanding its coverage. Oh, they're doing more and videos, and the athletes are gonna just report the news themselves. They're gonna be their own brands, and they're gonna put it out there themselves. Okay, well, that is a very biased perception of the program, and it's gonna be maroon and orange tinted lens that you're seeing all that stuff. But I think a lot of fans out there, as much as they like the team, also want to get a realistic view
I want the truth
of how things happen. And if things aren't going great, I'm going to tell you that things aren't going great. And sometimes that rubs people the wrong way. And, oh, you're a hater and all this stuff. It's like, no, I'm just a non-biased observer of this stuff. And I'm going to stay that way regardless of how long I've been around stuff. So you have relationships with people over at Virginia Tech that have covered, but I think they understand. And I think a lot of people over there appreciate that I'm going to cover it that way. I'm not going to be a hot take artist. When they're terrible, I'm not going to just be like, go over the top, like, oh my God, fire everybody, because that's not helpful. And that's not an actual solution to this stuff. That is, fan sentiment and reaction to things when they're not happy about the way things are going. So I'm going to cover the program fairly. What is that? The movie Almost Famous, Be Honest and Unmerciful. It's a great journalism movie between all the other stuff in it. But that is the advice from Lester Bangs on that movie is, be honest and unmerciful when you're covering stuff. And that's the way that I like to cover stuff. And I think people appreciate that. When I talk to Witt, I think he always is like, you cover us fair. And I think that's the best compliment you can get from somebody in that situation is, I'm going to cover the program fairly.
Yeah. Like at the beginning of the season last year, I remember I wrote the title of one of my Monday Thoughts articles was T-Bowen or not T-Bowen, that is the question. And honestly, I don't remember what I wrote, but it was a long commentary on how the offense was going. And that's what everybody was talking about. In retrospect, the column almost looks silly. It does and it doesn't, because the offense was so much better at the end of the year. I don't even want to know what I wrote back then because they did turn things around and it became better. So let me ask you, Vippy 1, and I think we'll have to close on this because we've been sitting here a while and somebody needs a restroom break. Vippy 1 says, can talented young people still have a career in sports journalism and pay the bills, or is it exceedingly difficult to survive and thrive in today's environment?
It's tough for me to answer how young journalists are handling this because I'm no longer a young journalist. Mid-40s at this point. I've been doing this for a while. It's interesting because, I taught a class for a semester at Virginia Tech. There's this class over there that has annual assignment, go interview a professional in the field that you like to do. I do like 2, sometimes 3 of those a semester when that assignment gets out there. And these are obviously young, eager journalists that are pursuing that in college. So I don't want to go in there and be like this grump that's like, the industry stinks and you're coming in too late for this whole thing. And, I don't want to crush anybody's dreams about what they're doing, but I also want to be realistic about the direction of the program or direction of the industry. And it hasn't been great in the last couple decades.
The written part of it.
Yeah. I can point to something recently. I've been laid off within the last year and a half to show you that it's not a great time in journalism. That said, everything in my life in the last 25 years has sort of been a result. I live in Virginia because of journalism. I met my wife because of journalism. I have persevered through job changes and, dodging landmines of layoffs and furloughs and things like that to continue my career to the point where I am now in journalism, doing something that I love to do. So it's not for everybody. It's not going to be just an upward arc. You're not going to have job offers galore everywhere you go. But if you truly like to do it, I think there's a path and a career there.
Yeah.
What is that in the future? I'm not quite sure. I don't have a crystal ball. If I did, I would have seen the layoff coming a lot more clearer than I did. But there's still a place out there for well-reported articles, great feature stories, journalistic enterprises. You just have to find a place that wants to produce those. Yeah. And maybe that's the challenge of it right now, is because you look at some of these content farms that are out there and some of the terrible stuff that they put out there and the clickbait headlines and misleading. Oh, we're just trying to stoke the argument on this stuff. And now even worse than that, the AI stuff is just horrendously written in like a robot voice and like an alien tense. Like it's just, it's unbelievable. And you can tell it when you read it. Like this was not written by a human being. So I think there's people out there, people still value well-created content like that. It is a challenge to get paid for that kind of content, but clearly I found a path to still be doing it here, 23 years in. So I don't want to discourage people from that, but I do like to lay out the realities of it.
Well, you have to work hard and you have to be good, is what it comes down to. And it has to be your passion. And I tell people all the time, and you'll hear me repeat this many times, that there's an old Steve Martin comedy routine from back when he was primarily stand-up, and he's singing a song and he ends it with, "The most amazing thing to me is I get paid for doing this," which floors me that I've been in this business now 26 years, I think, 27, 28, I don't know. It's a lot, and it's pretty crazy, almost half my life. So appreciate you coming on and talking about all this stuff, and I hope you all enjoyed it. Nick, how far into it are we? 147, about 100 minutes.
If you're still listening now, wow, congratulations.
It's been multiple sessions as you drive around in the car and stuff like that. So thanks for watching and listening, folks. That is episode 361 of the Tech Sideline Podcast, brought to you by First Bank and Trust Company and Robertson and Cox Real Estate. We'll see you next time.